What if your dream cruise cabin was designed to kill you? Welcome to Mr. Nightveil, where tonight we're exposing 10 cruise ship cabins hiding terrifying secrets that the industry desperately wants buried. These aren't fairy tales. Every story you're about to hear is 100% real. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect survivors. But the horror, completely authentic. Before we begin, drop your location and current time in the comments below. Can you survive all 10 stories? Hit subscribe and let's dive into the darkness together. My name is Ezra, and I'm a marine engineer who thought a cheap Mediterranean cruise would help me forget about my divorce. I was wrong. What I found in cabin 4127 wasn't peace. It was something that still makes me check behind every mirror in my house. I booked the cruise 3 months after the papers were finalized. My ex-wife got the house, the car, and most of our friends. I got loneliness and a bank account that could barely afford a week on the budget deck of the Azure Voyager cruise line. Interior cabin 427 was the cheapest option available. No windows, no balcony, just 4 walls and a bed. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear for a while. The moment I stepped into that cabin, something felt wrong. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, like walking into a freezer. I checked the thermostat. It was set to 72 degrees, but the temperature felt closer to 50. I called maintenance. They sent someone up who looked at the thermostat, shrugged, and told me the AC system was working fine. He suggested I was probably just adjusting to being indoors after the hot deck. I didn't argue. I just wanted to be left alone. That first night, I tried to sleep. The ship's engine hummed beneath me, a constant rhythmic vibration that should have been comforting for someone who'd worked on marine vessels for 15 years. But there was another sound underneath it. Scratching. Faint, persistent scratching coming from inside the walls. I told myself it was pipes expanding and contracting, maybe electrical wiring settling. I'd heard stranger sounds on ships before. But here's what you need to understand. Ships don't make sounds that follow patterns. Ships don't scratch in groups of 3, pause, then scratch 3 times again. That's not mechanical. That's intentional. I barely slept. When morning came, I escaped to the buffet, spent the day at the pool, took every shore excursion available. Anything to avoid that cabin. But eventually, night came again, and I had to go back. Night 2 started the same way. Cold air, scratching sounds. But this time, when I woke up at 3 a.m., my suitcase had been moved from the closet to the middle of the floor. My shoes, which I'd left by the door, were arranged in a perfect line along the wall. My toiletries from the bathroom were spread across the desk in a pattern I didn't recognize. My heart was pounding. Someone had been in my cabin. I checked the door, locked from the inside, with the security latch engaged. The only way someone could have entered was with a master key, and they would have had to re-engage the latch from inside before leaving, which was impossible. I called the front desk. They sent security. A tired officer looked around, checked the door, and suggested I might have arranged things myself and forgotten due to jet lag. He actually said that. Jet lag. On a cruise ship. I wanted to grab him and show him the scratches I'd just noticed on the wall near the bed. Deep gouges in the paint forming letters. But I didn't, because I wasn't sure they'd been there before, and I wasn't ready to admit I might be losing my mind. After he left, I turned on every light and examined those scratches. They spelled something. H-E-L-P. 4 letters carved into the wall, hidden behind where the headboard should have been. Someone had moved my bed 6 inches away from the wall. Not me. I would have remembered that. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the desk chair with the lights on until sunrise, watching that word on the wall, listening to the scratching continue inside the walls around me. This time it wasn't random. It was moving. From the left wall to the ceiling to the right wall, like something was circling the room inside the structure of the ship. Day 3, I went to guest services. I demanded a new cabin. They told me the ship was fully booked, not a single cabin available. I could file a complaint and receive a refund for this cabin after the cruise ended, but there was nowhere to move me. I asked about the history of cabin 4127. The woman's face changed. She became very professional, very cold. She told me all cabins were regularly maintained and there was nothing unusual about my assignment. That's when I knew she was lying. I've spent 15 years reading people on ships, crew members, officers, engineers. I know when someone's been told to keep quiet about something. I spent that day in the ship's library using their computer. I searched for Azure Voyager disappearance and found it. 3 years ago, a passenger named, well, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that he vanished from this ship. Boarded in Barcelona, never disembarked in Rome. His cabin was listed as 4127, interior cabin, budget deck. The official report said he likely went overboard, probably suicide or accident. Case closed. But I'm an engineer. I know ship layouts. I know that interior cabins are surrounded by other cabins, hallways, and maintenance spaces. There's a whole infrastructure of crawl spaces, ductwork, and access panels that passengers never see. And if someone knew those spaces, if someone got stuck in them. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I started investigating the cabin properly. I removed the mirror from the bathroom wall. It was just held by adhesive strips. Behind it was an access panel, painted over but clearly there. I used my pocket knife to break the paint seal and pulled it open. The smell hit me first. Decay, mold, and something else. Something human. Inside was a space about 2 feet deep, running along the wall into darkness. And there were items inside. A water bottle, empty. A wallet. A phone, dead battery. A watch still ticking. And scratches. Hundreds of scratches on every surface, like someone had clawed at the walls trying to get out. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the wallet. I knew what I'd find. The ID matched the missing passenger. He'd been here. He'd been trapped in this space behind my cabin, behind the walls, and he died here. But if he died 3 years ago, what was scratching now? I backed away from that hole in the wall, and that's when I saw the mirror I'd removed, propped against the bathroom counter. My reflection was there, but it wasn't moving with me. It was standing perfectly still, staring at me while I stumbled backward. The face was mine, but the expression wasn't. It was terrified. Mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from being trapped in the dark for days with no way out. I ran. I didn't pack, didn't grab anything. I ran out of cabin 4127 and went straight to the captain's office. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I told them everything. The scratching, the items, the body that had to still be in that crawl space, the reflection that wasn't mine. They searched the cabin. They found the access panel open, the items I'd described. They found remains in the crawl space, skeletal remains that had been there for years, hidden in a section of the ship that wasn't on any maintenance schedule. The passenger hadn't gone overboard. He'd been investigating strange sounds in his cabin, opened that panel, crawled inside, and the panel had closed behind him. Locked somehow. Trapped him in a space too small to turn around, too dark to find the way out. He'd scratched at the walls until his fingers bled, trying to get someone's attention. And he died there, inches away from people sleeping in the cabin, while everyone assumed he jumped overboard. They moved me to a crew cabin for the remainder of the voyage. They refunded my entire cruise. They made me sign papers promising I wouldn't speak about what happened. But I'm speaking now because people need to know. Cabin 40-27 exists on other ships too. Budget interior cabins with no windows, surrounded by crawl spaces that aren't inspected. And sometimes those spaces aren't empty. Sometimes they contain people who made one wrong move, opened one wrong panel, and never found their way back out. The scratching I heard wasn't pipes. It wasn't the ship settling. It was him, still trying to signal for help, still trying to warn the next person, still trying to prevent someone else from opening that panel and disappearing into the walls. I never took another cruise. I never will. Because now I know what's hiding behind the mirrors, inside the walls, in the spaces between the cabins where no one thinks to look. And I know that sometimes the people who disappear at sea never actually reach the water. They're still there, trapped in the ship, scratching at the walls, hoping someone will finally hear them. If you ever book an interior cabin and it feels too cold, if you hear scratching at night, if your belongings move on their own, get out. Don't investigate. Don't open any panels. Just get out. Because some mysteries aren't worth solving, and some secrets are better left buried in the walls. My name is Michaela, and I used to think luxury cruise blogging was the safest job in the world. I was wrong. What I discovered on the balcony of Suite B47 wasn't just content for my followers. It was evidence of something so dark that 3 people are dead because they saw what I saw. I'm only alive because I knew when to stop recording. I run a travel blog called Wanderlust Waves with about 200,000 followers across platforms. Cruise lines love me because I make their ships look like floating paradises. The Celestial Seas Company reached out offering a complimentary 7-night Caribbean voyage in exchange for daily content. They upgraded me to a balcony suite on B deck, premium location, massive outdoor space, perfect lighting for photos. I thought I'd won the lottery. Suite B47 was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a king bed with ocean views, and a balcony so large it had 2 separate seating areas, plus a locked storage closet the size of a small room. When I asked about accessing the closet, the room's steward's face went blank. He told me it was for emergency equipment only, crew access exclusively. Strange, but I didn't push. I had enough space for content without it. The first 2 days were perfect. I filmed sunrise yoga on the balcony, reviewed the room service, documented every luxurious detail. My engagement was through the roof. People loved the suite tour, kept asking for more balcony content. So on night 2, I set up my camera on a tripod for a sunset time-lapse, planning to let it run for a few hours to capture the transition from day to night. I fell asleep around 11 p.m. When I woke up at 2 a.m. to stop the recording, I noticed something odd through the balcony glass. Lights below. My suite was on B deck, which meant A deck was directly beneath me. But A deck was supposedly crew-only storage areas and mechanical rooms, no cabins, no passenger access, no reason for activity at 2 a.m. Curiosity is what makes me good at my job. It's also what almost got me killed. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down. The deck below was sealed off with metal barriers and authorized personnel-only signs. But in the center of that restricted area, about 15 crew members were gathered in a circle. They were wearing white robes, not uniforms, actual ceremonial-looking robes. and they were standing around something I couldn't quite see from my angle. I grabbed my camera with the zoom lens. Through the viewfinder, I could see them more clearly. They were chanting, swaying in unison, and in the center of their circle was a table. On that table was a large, dark bundle, roughly the size of a person wrapped in canvas. My hands were shaking as I took photos. This was insane. What kind of ritual was happening on a cruise ship? I recorded video, zoomed in as much as possible without losing clarity. The crew members lifted the bundle and carried it toward a door marked with a red cross symbol. Medical bay or morgue. I watched for 20 minutes. When they finally dispersed, I went back inside and reviewed the footage. It was clear, detailed, undeniable. Crew members in ceremonial dress, performing what looked like a religious ritual over a body, at 2 a.m. in a restricted area. This wasn't normal crew activity. This was something else. But here's the thing about being a travel blogger. I rely on cruise lines for access, for upgrades, for the content that pays my bills. Posting this could destroy my career. So I didn't post it. I just saved it, thinking maybe I'd figure out an innocent explanation. The next morning, I found the first blood stain. It was on my balcony railing, dark brown and dried, positioned exactly where I'd rested my hands while watching the deck below. I hadn't noticed it the night before, which meant someone had put it there while I was sleeping, or while I was watching them. I cleaned it off, told myself it was rust or paint. But my stomach knew better. That afternoon, I returned from lunch to find a note slipped under my door. Plain white paper, printed words, "Stop watching or you're next." No signature, no explanation, just a threat. That's when the excitement turned to fear. Someone knew I'd been on the balcony. Someone had seen me watching. And someone wanted me to know they could reach me anytime. I should have reported it. I should have gone to the captain immediately. But I'm not proud of what I did instead. I became obsessed. I started researching the ship layout, trying to understand what was directly below my suite. I befriended a bartender and casually asked about A deck. His smile disappeared. He told me some areas of ships are off limits for good reasons, and smart passengers don't ask questions. That night, I didn't film the balcony. I sat in the dark and waited. Sure enough, at midnight, the lights came on below. The same crew members, the same white robes, another bundle on the table. But this time I noticed something else. The door they carried it through wasn't just marked with a medical cross. It had a number, M3, Morgue Level 3. Why would a cruise ship need 3 levels of morgue space? Ships carry body storage for passengers who die during voyages, but 3 levels? For a ship carrying 2,000 passengers? That's capacity for dozens of bodies, not the 1 or 2 deaths you might expect during a normal cruise. I took more photos, more video. I documented everything. And then I made a mistake. I posted a vague story on my blog. Nothing specific, just a cryptic message. Sometimes luxury cruises hide secrets in plain sight. What happens on restricted decks? More coming soon. My followers went crazy, demanding details. The post got 50,000 views in 3 hours, and that's when things escalated. I woke up at 4 a.m. to my balcony door sliding open. I hadn't opened it. I'd locked it before bed. But there it was, wide open, curtains blowing in the ocean wind. And on my balcony chair was another note. Delete everything. Last warning. My heart was racing so hard I thought I'd pass out. Someone had entered my suite while I was sleeping. They had access to override my locks. They could have killed me right there, but instead they were giving me a chance to comply. I grabbed my laptop and started backing up files to cloud storage, encrypting everything. Then I did what I should have done from the beginning. I researched previous guests of Suite B47. It took hours, but I found them through travel review sites and social media. 4 previous guests in the past year who'd stayed in this exact suite. 2 had posted negative reviews mentioning disturbing noises at night and requesting room changes. 1 had checked out early, forfeiting the rest of their cruise. The 4th had posted beautiful photos of the suite, then never posted again. Her account went silent mid-cruise. I found her obituary. She died 3 weeks after her cruise. Accident at home. Carbon monoxide leak. That's when everything clicked into place. This wasn't just about what happened on the ship. This was about making sure witnesses never made it home to tell anyone. I went to the ship's library and used their public computer, avoiding my own devices. I found crew recruitment listings for Celestial Seas that seemed wrong. Promises of high pay, international travel, opportunities for advancement that required signing unusual contracts. I found message boards where family members were searching for crew members who'd stopped communicating after joining this cruise line. The morgue wasn't storing passengers who died naturally. It was storing people who'd been silenced. Crew members who learned too much. Passengers who witnessed operations they shouldn't have seen. Anyone who became a problem. The trafficking operation wasn't moving people onto the ship. It was recruiting them under false pretenses, trapping them in contracts they couldn't escape, and eliminating those who tried to leave. And Suite B47? It wasn't an upgrade. It was a test. They put people here to see if they'd notice the activity below, if they'd investigate, if they'd become liabilities. The balcony was positioned perfectly to overlook their operation. It was bait, and I'd taken it completely. I had one choice that mattered: survive long enough to get off the ship. I deleted every public post about the cruise. I wiped my visible devices clean. But the encrypted files stayed in cloud storage, along with instructions to release everything if anything happened to me. I sent copies to 3 trusted friends with dead man switch protocols. If I didn't check in every 48 hours, the files would automatically go to journalists and investigators. Then I became the perfect, compliant guest. I stayed in my suite during the rituals, posted happy content about sunsets and cocktails, acted like the blogger they wanted me to be. I smiled for photos with crew members, thanked them profusely, promised glowing reviews. When the cruise ended, I walked off that ship like nothing had happened. I even waved goodbye to the captain. 2 weeks later, I sent anonymous tips to maritime investigators with just enough detail to start their own investigation. I provided encrypted files to journalists who specialize in human trafficking cases. I made sure that even if something happened to me, the evidence would survive and spread. 3 months after that, Celestial Seas suspended all operations pending federal investigation. 6 crew members were arrested on trafficking and murder charges. The ship was impounded in international waters. News outlets called it the largest maritime criminal operation uncovered in decades. And then I received a package at my home. No return address. Inside was a single white ceremonial robe and a handwritten note. You were lucky this time. I don't blog about cruises anymore. My Wanderlust Waves account is deleted. I work from home now, doing freelance writing about destinations I can reach by car, places where I control my exit strategy. I check my carbon monoxide detectors twice daily. I vary my routes. I sleep with my phone recording audio every night. Because they're still out there. Not everyone was arrested. Not every ship was caught. And they know my name, my face, my address. Suite B47 sits empty now on a ship that will probably be dismantled for parts. But there are other cruise lines, other companies, other suites with balconies overlooking restricted areas. Other bloggers getting unexpected upgrades, thinking they've been chosen for their content quality, not realizing they're being tested for their silence. Sometimes I wonder how many people stood on that balcony before me. How many saw what I saw? How many stayed quiet and lived? How many spoke up and didn't? The blood stain on my railing wasn't rust. The note under my door wasn't a prank. The woman who stopped posting mid-cruise didn't die from carbon monoxide by accident. And the bundle wrapped in canvas wasn't ceremonial. It was disposal. I'm telling this story now because the investigation is public, because the arrests have been made, because I'm betting my life that enough people know the truth that silencing me would draw more attention than letting me speak. But I sleep with one eye open. And I never, ever accept upgrades I didn't pay for. My name is Chen, and this is a warning to anyone considering crew work on the Oceanic Star. What they don't tell you during recruitment is that some ships have passengers who never disembark. They're not on the manifest. They're not in the system. They live in the spaces between decks, and the company knows. They've always known. I took this job because I needed money. My family back home was depending on remittances, and cruise work promised good pay with room and board included. The contract was 9 months, long enough to save serious money. I signed without reading the fine print, packed a single bag, and flew to Miami to join the crew. Orientation was 3 days of safety training, uniform fittings, and being told to smile no matter what passengers said or did. Then they assigned me to crew quarters on Deck 2, the lowest level where staff sleep when we're not working 12-hour shifts. 4 of us shared a room barely bigger than a passenger bathroom. 2 bunk beds, 4 lockers, 1 porthole window that looked out at the waterline. I got the top bunk on the left. The mattress was thin, covered in a plastic sheet that crinkled every time I moved. And it smelled. Not like sweat or body odor, like something had died there and been inadequately cleaned. A dark brown stain spread across the center, shaped like a handprint reaching toward the edge. My roommates were friendly enough, but exhausted. They worked, ate, slept, and repeated the cycle without conversation. When I asked about the stain, one of them, a guy from the Philippines who'd been on board for 2 years, just shrugged and said, "Don't sleep in the middle. Stay near the wall." That first night, I couldn't sleep. The smell was overwhelming, and the ship's engine vibrated through the walls with a rhythm that felt almost alive. I kept thinking about that stain, about what could leave a mark like that. Around 3 a.m., I decided to flip the mattress, maybe find a cleaner side. That's when I found the diary. It was wedged between the mattress and the bed frame, a small notebook with water-damaged pages and handwriting that got progressively harder to read as the entries continued. The first page had a name. Property of Dimitri, room steward, deck 2, bunk 7 left top. My exact bunk. I should have reported it. Standard procedure is to turn in any lost items to the purser's office. But I was curious, and curiosity in this job is dangerous. The entries started normal enough. Dimitri wrote about his first weeks on the ship, complaints about the hours, observations about difficult passengers. But around week 5, the tone changed. He started writing about sounds in the walls, scratching, movement in the air vents above his bed. He thought it was rats at first, reported it to maintenance. They found nothing. Week 7. Something watches me sleep. I can feel it. When I wake up, items are moved. My shoes were under the opposite bunk this morning. I didn't put them there. Week 9. Found a handprint on the porthole. From the outside, we're at sea. Nothing should be outside our window, 3 decks above the waterline. Week 12. It's not rats. I followed the sounds tonight. They led to a maintenance corridor behind the engine room. The door was supposed to be locked, but it wasn't. Inside I found food wrappers, empty water bottles, clothes. Someone is living down there. The entries became frantic after that. Dmitri had started investigating during his off hours, following passages that didn't appear on crew maps, finding evidence of habitation in spaces that should be empty. He documented everything, dates, times, locations. And then, on what must have been his final entry, he wrote, "I saw it tonight. Not an it. A him. He was human once. Now he's something else. He knows I've seen him. I need to tell someone before." The entry ended mid-sentence. The rest of the pages were blank, except for that brown stain that had soaked through from the mattress above. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that bunk reading and rereading those entries, trying to convince myself it was fiction, a story Dmitri wrote to scare the next crew member. But the locations he described were real. I'd walked past some of those corridors during orientation, and his handwriting, the way it deteriorated from neat script to desperate scrawling, that wasn't performance. That was fear. The next day, I asked my supervisor about Dmitri. She barely looked up from her paperwork. "Crew turnover is high. People leave all the time. Why are you asking?" "Just curious about who had my bunk before me." Her expression hardened. "Focus on your own work. Don't worry about previous crew." That response told me everything. She knew who Dmitri was. She knew he was gone. And she didn't want me asking questions. So I stopped asking and started investigating. I used my break times to explore. The ship had sections that passengers never saw. Maintenance corridors, storage areas, the lower engine decks where machinery thundered so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. I followed Dmitri's notes, matched his descriptions to real locations, and I found what he found. Evidence of someone living in the ship's infrastructure. Recent evidence. A mattress made from life jackets in a storage room. Canned food stolen from kitchen supplies, opened and consumed. A bucket used as a toilet, hidden behind machinery. And everywhere this smell. The same decay smell from my mattress. But stronger, concentrated. Something was living down here. Something that had been human. I found him on my 4th night of searching. I'd gone deeper than before, past areas marked crew authorized only, into sections that didn't have signs at all. The passage was narrow, lit by emergency lights that flickered irregularly. I heard movement ahead. Not footsteps exactly, more like dragging, shuffling. And then I saw him. He was crouched in the corner where 2 corridors met, wearing shredded remains of what might have been passenger clothes years ago. His skin was pale, almost translucent from lack of sunlight. His hair was long, matted, falling past his shoulders. But his eyes were aware, intelligent, terrified. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I saw the same fear in his eyes that I'd felt reading Dmitri's diary. He spoke first. His voice was rough, unused. "Your new crew." I nodded, unable to form words. "You found the diary?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then you know what I am, what I became." He shifted, and I saw how thin he was, how his movements were more animal than human after years of living in crawl spaces and eating scraps. "How long have you been down here?" I managed to ask. "I don't know anymore. Time doesn't work the same. I was a passenger once. Anniversary cruise with my wife. We had a fight. I went for a walk on deck at night, had too much to drink, wandered into a crew area by mistake, got lost in the corridors. By the time I found my way back, the ship had logged me as overboard, lost at sea. My wife filed a report, searched my cabin, left the ship in mourning. And I was down here the whole time, too confused and ashamed to reveal myself. Why didn't you tell someone? Why hide? His laugh was bitter, broken. I tried. The first crew member who found me promised to help. Instead, he reported me to security. They came down, saw me, and made a decision. Reporting a passenger found alive after being declared dead would create legal problems, insurance nightmares, lawsuits. Easier to keep quiet. They offered me a choice: disembark quietly at the next port and sign papers saying I'd never speak about what happened, or stay on the ship permanently. You chose to stay. I chose to run. I hid before they could force me off, and I've been hiding ever since, living in the walls like a rat. They know I'm here. Security sweeps these areas sometimes, leaves food where I can find it, makes sure I don't die. But they won't help me leave. I'm a liability they contain, not a problem they solve. My stomach turned. How many crew members have found you? Dozens over the years. Some report me and get transferred to different ships. Some try to help and disappear, like your bunk's previous occupant. Some just pretend they never saw me and go on with their work. His eyes locked onto mine. What will you do? That was the question I couldn't answer. Dmitri had tried to expose this and ended up as a stain on a mattress. Other crew members had helped and vanished. And this man, this passenger who'd been swallowed by the ship years ago, was proof that the company prioritized profit over human life. I could report it. Go to the captain, demand action, threaten to contact authorities at the next port. But I'd signed a contract with arbitration clauses and non-disclosure agreements I hadn't read carefully. I was in international waters where maritime law was murky and company policy was king. And I needed this job. My family needed my remittances. I don't know, I admitted. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. The diary writer tried to save me. He brought me real food, clean water, even a blanket. He was planning to smuggle me off at port, had a whole plan worked out. Then security found out. They took him somewhere. I never saw him again. Found his diary in my hiding spot a week later, dropped there like a warning. Why are you telling me this? Because you're standing at the same crossroads he stood at. And I need you to understand what happens when crew members choose conscience over compliance. He pulled something from his pocket, a crew ID badge, cracked and faded. Dimitri's face stared back at me from the photo. They didn't fire him. They didn't transfer him. They disappeared him, just like they disappeared me. The difference is, nobody's looking for crew members. We're replaceable. I took the badge with shaking hands. Physical evidence that Dmitri hadn't just quit, hadn't just gone home. He'd tried to do the right thing, and the ship had swallowed him for it. What do? I asked. Survive your contract. Keep your head down. Forget you saw me. He started backing away into the darkness. Or be like him and try to save someone who's already lost. Your choice. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in that corridor with a dead man's ID and a decision that would define who I was. I'm writing this 3 months into my contract. I still have 6 months left. I haven't reported what I found. I haven't tried to help the passenger in the walls. I see security guards sometimes, walking corridors near where he lives, carrying supplies they pretend are for maintenance. The whole crew must know on some level. We all pretend we don't. I sleep in Dimitri's bunk every night, on that stained mattress, smelling the decay that might be mold or might be evidence of what happens to heroes on this ship. I send money home to my family. I smile at passengers. I clean their rooms and pretend everything is normal. But it's not normal, and every crew member who's worked here long enough knows it. The Oceanic Star has passengers who never leave. They live in the infrastructure, fed just enough to survive, kept quiet just enough to not cause problems. And the crew who try to expose it become part of the ship too, in ways that don't show up on manifests or in contracts. I'm telling you this because you need to know before you sign, before you take a bunk in crew quarters and find evidence left by whoever slept there before you, before you have to choose between your conscience and your survival. The pay is good. The work is hard but steady. And if you can ignore the sounds in the walls, the missing crew members nobody talks about, the passengers who vanished at sea but never actually left the ship, you'll do fine. Just don't be curious. Don't investigate. Don't try to save anyone. Because on the Oceanic Star, the only way to survive is to become the kind of person who can sleep on a mattress stained with someone else's conscience. My name is Victoria, and I spent my 40th birthday discovering that privacy is an illusion the wealthy pay extra for. The owner's suite on the grandeur of the seas wasn't just expensive, it was a cage disguised as paradise, and I walked into it willingly. When my aunt passed away 6 months ago, she left me enough money to change my life. Not generational wealth, but enough to pay off my mortgage and still have a substantial amount left over. I'd spent my entire adult life being responsible, working 2 jobs, saving every penny, sacrificing vacations and luxuries. So when I turned 40 without a partner, without children, without anyone to celebrate with, I made an impulsive decision. I booked the owner's suite on a 2-week transatlantic crossing, $16,000 for 14 nights, more than I'd ever spent on anything besides my house. The suite was everything the brochure promised. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a grand piano, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private wraparound balcony, a marble bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, and a dining room that could seat 8. It was obscene for one person. It was perfect. Within an hour of boarding, my butler arrived. He introduced himself simply as Lawrence and explained that he would be my personal attendant for the duration of the voyage. Anything I needed, any time of day or night, I only had to call. He was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of professional warmth that expensive hotels train into their staff. "I've taken the liberty of unpacking your luggage, Miss Victoria," he said, gesturing toward the bedroom where my clothes were already hung in the closet, organized by color and type. "I noticed you brought your mother's necklace, the sapphire one. It's lovely. I'm sure she would be proud to see you wearing it on such a special occasion." I froze. I hadn't mentioned my mother. The necklace was wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of my suitcase, deliberately hidden because I'd been uncertain about bringing something so valuable. There was no way he could have known it belonged to my mother just from unpacking it. "How did you know it was hers?" I asked carefully. His smile didn't waver. "I apologize if I overstepped. I simply assumed a piece of such sentimental value must have family significance. Was I correct?" It was a reasonable explanation. But something in his tone felt rehearsed, too smooth. I brushed it off as me being paranoid. Rich people probably had their staff research them before arrival. That's what you pay for at this level. Over the next 2 days, Lawrence was perfect. He anticipated my needs before I voiced them. He knew I preferred coffee at 7 a.m., that I liked my eggs scrambled but not too dry, that I read thrillers and would appreciate the new bestseller placed on my nightstand. He was attentive without being intrusive, Professional, without being cold. But then came the third morning. I'd woken up early, before my usual coffee delivery, and was standing on my balcony in a robe watching the sunrise. I was thinking about my aunt, about how she'd always told me to live more, worry less. I spoke out loud to the ocean, something I'd never admit to anyone. You were right, Aunt Helen. I should have done this years ago. I'm sorry I didn't visit you more before you got sick. An hour later, Lawrence arrived with breakfast. As he set down the tray, he said casually, "Your Aunt Helen sounds like she was a remarkable woman. I'm certain she would be delighted to know you're honoring her memory this way." My blood went cold. I hadn't mentioned my aunt's name to anyone on this ship. I hadn't even mentioned having an aunt. The only way he could know her name was if he'd heard my private conversation on the balcony. "I never told you about my aunt," I said slowly. Lawrence's expression remained pleasant. "I apologize. Perhaps I overheard you speaking with another passenger? Or perhaps you mentioned it during our initial meeting and I remembered? Memory can be unreliable." He was gaslighting me. Professionally, politely, but gaslighting nonetheless. I waited until he left. Then I started searching. The suite was massive, which meant there were hundreds of places to hide surveillance equipment. I started with the obvious: smoke detectors, air vents, mirrors. Nothing visible. But I'm not technically incompetent. I'd read articles about hidden cameras, knew they could be tiny, disguised as anything. I used my phone camera to scan for infrared lights that would indicate recording devices. I found the first one in the bedroom, hidden inside the decorative trim of a picture frame positioned to capture the entire bed. The second was in the bathroom, inside the shower head, angled toward the bathtub. The third was in the living room, disguised as a screw head on the thermostat. By the time I'd searched the entire suite, I'd found 11 cameras and what I suspected were audio recording devices in every room. Every single room. Someone had been watching me sleep, shower, change clothes, cry on the phone to my best friend about feeling alone on my birthday. Every private moment since I'd boarded had been recorded. I should have gone to the captain immediately. Should have demanded an investigation, threatened lawsuits, made a scene. But I didn't, because I started thinking about what I'd done in this suite over the past 3 days. I'd tried on clothes and rejected outfits, leaving them on the floor. I'd sung off key in the shower. I'd drunk too much wine one night and danced alone in the living room. Embarrassing, but not damaging. Then I remembered the video call with my financial advisor, discussing the inheritance amount, my bank account numbers, my investment strategy. All captured on camera. All potentially valuable to the wrong people. I needed to know how deep this went before I decided what to do. That evening, I invited Lawrence to join me for dinner in the suite. I'd ordered an elaborate meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and when he arrived to serve it, I asked him to sit down. "I want to be honest with you," I said, watching his face carefully. "I found the cameras." Most people would panic, deny, show some reaction. Lawrence simply nodded and took a sip of wine. "I wondered if you might. You're more observant than most guests." "Most guests? This is standard practice?" "For the owner's suite, yes. For the past 3 years, every guest in this particular accommodation has been comprehensively monitored." He said it like he was describing a hotel amenity. "The footage is used for security purposes initially, but valuable guests often reveal valuable information." "Blackmail?" I said flatly. Such an ugly word. Think of it as insurance. Many of our owner's suite guests are extremely wealthy individuals with reputations to protect. Sometimes they make choices during their vacation that they'd prefer remain private. We ensure that privacy for a reasonable ongoing fee. My stomach turned. You blackmail your richest customers. We provide a service, total discretion guaranteed, in exchange for modest financial considerations. Most guests find the arrangement preferable to having their indiscretions become public. He leaned forward. The gentleman who stayed in this suite before you, for example. He brought his mistress on what his wife believed was a business trip. We have quite extensive footage. He now contributes to our operational fund quarterly. Everyone benefits. And if someone refuses to pay? Lawrence's smile turned cold. That would be unwise. Though to be fair, we haven't had many refusals. People who can afford $16,000 suites can usually afford our fees. And they universally prefer our silence to the alternative. I felt sick. What about me? What exactly do you have? He pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me. On the screen was a folder labeled with my name, containing dozens of video files. He clicked one at random, me on the phone with my financial advisor, my account numbers clearly visible on my laptop screen as I confirmed transactions. Another showed me crying in the bathroom, talking to myself about how alone I felt. A third captured me changing clothes, completely naked, unaware I was being filmed. Hours of footage, Lawrence said quietly. Most of it innocuous, some of it potentially embarrassing. Your financial information alone would be valuable to certain parties. And there's the matter of your inheritance. I'm certain your late aunt's other relatives would be interested to know how you spoke about them during your private phone calls. What was it you said? That your cousin was a greedy bastard who only showed up when she was dying? I imagine that could cause some family tension. I wanted to throw the tablet at him, to scream, to call security. But he was right about one thing. I had said terrible but true things about my family in the privacy of this suite. Thing that, taken out of context and distributed, could destroy relationships I still valued despite their flaws. What do you want? I asked. A very reasonable monthly contribution, $5,000, barely noticeable for someone with your assets. In exchange, all this footage remains completely confidential. You finish your cruise, go home, and periodically make a transfer to an offshore account. Simple, clean. Everyone walks away satisfied. $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. In a decade, I'd pay more than half my inheritance just to keep this footage private. And there was no guarantee they wouldn't ask for more later, wouldn't keep escalating the price once they had me trapped. I need time to think, I managed to say. Of course, you have until we dock. After that, well, decisions become more complicated. He stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked to the door. Then he paused. For what it's worth, Miss Victoria, you're handling this much better than most. Some guests become quite hysterical. It's refreshing to work with someone rational. After he left, I sat in that enormous suite surrounded by hidden cameras and tried to think logically. I had options. I could go to the captain, but the operation had run for 3 years without being shut down. Which meant either the captain was complicit or the cruise line's corporate structure protected it. I could go to the police when we docked. But we were in international waters for most of the journey. And by the time we reached port, the evidence could vanish. I could refuse to pay and dare them to release the footage. But that was gambling with my reputation, my family relationships, and potentially my financial security if my account information was sold. Every option led to some kind of loss. I spent the next 3 days gathering my own evidence. I photographed every camera I'd found. I recorded conversations with Lawrence where he casually referenced things he could only know from surveillance. I documented everything in encrypted files stored in cloud accounts he couldn't access. If I was going down, I'd take the operation with me. But I also started thinking about the other guests. How many people had stayed in this suite? How many had been blackmailed? How many were still paying, trapped like I was about to be trapped? On the final night before we docked, Lawrence came to discuss arrangements. I told him I'd pay, that I'd set up the transfers, that I just needed account information. He seemed pleased, relieved even, like I was making the smart choice. And maybe I was. Maybe fighting would cost more than surrendering. Maybe exposing them would hurt me more than it hurt them. That's what they counted on, that wealthy people would always choose reputation over justice. I'm home now. It's been 2 months. I haven't made any transfers. I also haven't released any evidence. I exist in this strange limbo, waiting to see what they'll do, knowing they're waiting to see what I'll do. The footage still exists somewhere. My privacy was violated in ways I can't undo. And I have to decide whether I'm willing to destroy myself to expose them, or whether I'm willing to pay for silence and become complicit in a system that will trap the next person who books the owner's suite looking for luxury and finds surveillance instead. Every day I don't act. I choose complicity. Every day I don't pay, I risk exposure. This is the trap they built, not cameras and recordings, but the impossible choice between principles and self-preservation. I spent $16,000 to celebrate my 40th birthday in the most expensive suite on the ship. What I actually purchased was a front-row seat to learning exactly how much my privacy and dignity were worth to people who make money from exploiting both. The owner's suite is still available for booking. Lawrence is still working as a butler. And somewhere, there are hours of footage of me living my life. Thinking I was alone, believing that luxury meant safety. I don't know yet which choice I'll make. But I know that either way, I've already lost something I can't buy back, no matter how much inheritance money my aunt left me. Some cages are lined with marble and equipped with jacuzzis. They're still cages. My name is Sebastian, and I used to believe pharmaceutical companies operated within ethical boundaries. That illusion died in cabin M12, adjacent to a medical bay, where my employer was turning cruise passengers into unauthorized test subjects. The worst part? I'd been supplying the drugs for 6 months without knowing what they were really for. I work in pharmaceutical sales for Meridian Biopharm, one of the largest drug manufacturers in North America. My territory covers the eastern seaboard, and I've been with the company for 8 years. Good salary, excellent benefits, and a clean conscience because I believed we were helping people. When my regional manager told me I'd been selected to attend a 3-day medical conference aboard the Infinity Cruiser, I was flattered. Only top performers got invited to these industry events where we'd network with doctors, present new products, and strengthen professional relationships. The conference was scheduled mid-voyage on a 7-day Caribbean cruise. Attendees, about 40 pharmaceutical reps and 30 physicians, were assigned cabins clustered on M-deck near the ship's medical facilities for convenience. My cabin, M12, was literally next door to the medical bay. I could hear the hum of equipment through the shared wall. First night aboard, I barely noticed the sounds. Ships are noisy, engines, ventilation, plumbing. But the second night, after the conference's opening reception, I was lying in bed around 2 a.m. when I heard voices through the wall. Not casual conversation, urgent clinical discussion. Words like dosage, adverse reaction, and vitals dropping filtered through clearly enough to understand this wasn't routine seasickness treatment. Medical emergencies happen on cruises. I tried to ignore it. But then I heard the equipment, not just heart monitors, but the distinctive beep pattern of IV infusion pumps. Multiple pumps running simultaneously. That's not emergency care. That's sustained treatment or monitoring. Professional curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, I walked past the medical bay on my way to the conference. Through the small window in the door, I glimpsed more equipment than any ship's medical facility should have. This wasn't a basic first aid station. It looked like a fully equipped hospital ward. During the conference's first session, I sat next to a ship's physician giving a presentation on maritime medicine. Afterward, I asked casually about the medical bay's capabilities. "We're equipped to handle most situations," he said. "The Infinity has one of the most advanced medical facilities at sea. We rarely need to evacuate patients." "That's impressive for a cruise ship." His smile was practiced. "Meridian Biopharm is one of our corporate sponsors. They've been very generous in funding our upgrades." Something about how he said it, like he was reading from a script, made my stomach tighten. I thanked him and left, but spent the rest of the day distracted. Why would my company sponsor a cruise ship's medical bay? We manufactured pharmaceuticals, not medical equipment. And why had I never heard about this sponsorship, despite working in the industry for nearly a decade? That night, the sounds through the wall were worse. Movement, voices, and at one point, someone crying. Not moaning in pain, actually sobbing, begging someone to stop. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but the fear in that voice was unmistakable. I got dressed, left my cabin, and tried the medical bay door. Locked. A sign indicated it was closed except for emergencies, with an intercom for after-hours assistance. I pressed the button. No answer. But I could hear activity inside. Footsteps, equipment sounds, definitely people working. Standing there in the empty corridor at 3 a.m., I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. I went back to my cabin, grabbed my conference badge that had authorized personnel printed on it, and found a service corridor I'd noticed earlier. Crew access areas on ships are often connected, designed for staff to move between sections without using passenger hallways. The service corridor ran behind the medical bay. I found an unmarked door, tried the handle, unlocked. Inside was a storage room filled with medical supplies. And there, on the shelves, were medications I recognized immediately. Not because I sold them through normal channels, but because I'd been moving them through what my company called our specialized distribution network. Let me explain something about pharmaceutical sales. Most of my job is legitimate, visiting doctors' offices, hospitals, presenting FDA-approved medications. But about a year ago, I was approached about handling specialized accounts. The pay was significantly better, and I was told that these were experimental drugs being distributed to select research facilities under compassionate use protocols. Basically, giving dying patients access to treatments still in trials when all other options had failed. I signed confidentiality agreements, received training on handling these particular medications, and started making deliveries to addresses that weren't hospitals or clinics. Warehouses, private offices, places that made me uncomfortable but not enough to ask questions. The money was good. The explanations were plausible. And I told myself I was helping people who had no other hope. Now I was staring at those same medications, stored in a cruise ship's medical bay, in quantities that made no sense for emergency care. Bottles marked with codes I recognized from my specialized distribution invoices. Experimental compounds that weren't FDA approved, weren't legally available outside of strictly monitored clinical trials. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone, documenting everything. Then I heard voices approaching from the medical bay. I ducked behind a shelf unit, watching through a gap as two people in scrubs entered the storage room. One was the physician who'd presented at the conference. The other was a nurse I didn't recognize. "We need more of the M47 compound," the doctor said. "The current subjects are showing tolerance. We'll need to increase dosage or switch to the newer formula. We're running low on the newer version. The next shipment doesn't arrive until we dock. Then we'll have to make do. How many subjects are still viable?" 12. 3 more were terminated last night. Too many complications. We've logged them as deceased passengers, natural causes. Bodies were already processed. My blood froze. Terminated. Bodies processed. These weren't compassionate use treatments for dying patients. This was something else entirely. They left with medication bottles, and I waited 5 minutes before leaving the storage room. I went back to my cabin and spent the rest of the night going through my phone, looking at delivery records I'd kept, addresses I'd delivered to over the past 6 months. One of them was a port facility in Miami, the same port where the Infinity cruiser was registered. I'd been supplying drugs for human experimentation without knowing it. My specialized distribution wasn't helping dying patients. It was providing experimental compounds to a floating laboratory that used cruise passengers as unwilling test subjects. The guilt was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to fall apart. I needed proof beyond what I'd overheard, something concrete enough that authorities couldn't ignore it or dismiss as paranoia. The next day, during a conference lunch break, I pretended to feel ill and asked to visit the medical bay. A nurse took my vitals, asked basic questions, then left me in an examination room while she consulted with the doctor. I used those 3 minutes to access the computer terminal in the room. It wasn't password protected. Apparently, they didn't expect snooping from inside the medical bay. Patient files were organized by cabin number. I clicked on one at random. Cabin 417. Passenger listed as deceased 3 days ago. Cause of death marked as cardiac event. But the file showed ongoing treatment notes dated after the supposed death. Daily updates on drug responses, vital signs, sedation levels. This person wasn't dead. They were being held somewhere. Sedated, used as a test subject. I clicked through more files. 12 passengers currently listed as deceased, but with active treatment records. All had reported feeling ill during the first few days of the cruise, seasickness, nausea, headaches. All had visited the medical bay for help. None had left. I was taking photos of the screen when the door opened. The ship's doctor walked in, and his expression told me he knew exactly what I'd been looking at. "Close the computer, Sebastian," he said calmly. I did, trying to act casual. You were accessing confidential patient files. That's a serious violation." He moved closer, blocking the door. "But I think we both know you saw more than files. You recognized the medications in storage, didn't you? There was no point in lying. The M47 compound, I've been delivering it." He nodded. "You have. You've been an excellent courier, reliable, discreet, incurious, until now." He opened a drawer, pulling out a syringe and a small vial. "This is unfortunate. We'd hoped to continue using your distribution network, but you've become a liability. You're going to kill me? We're going to help you. You're clearly experiencing severe anxiety, probably seasickness related. I'm going to give you something to help you relax." He began drawing fluid from the vial into the syringe. "Afterward, you'll be admitted for observation, just like the others. And like them, you'll unfortunately suffer complications. Tragic, but these things happen." I looked at that syringe and understood I had seconds to act. The computer terminal was still on. My phone was in my pocket with photos. But none of that mattered if I was sedated and locked away with the other test subjects. "Wait," I said. "I can help you. I have access to more compounds through my network. Experimental drugs that aren't even in your inventory yet. You kill me, you lose that access." He paused, considering. "What kind of compounds?" I started making things up, using technical language I'd learned from training materials, describing fictional medications that sounded plausible. I kept talking, watching him, waiting for an opening. It came when he set the syringe down to take notes on what I was saying. I grabbed the nearest object, a metal tray, and swung it at his head. It connected with his temple, and he dropped. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious or dead. I ran. The conference was still in session, hundreds of people in the main hall. I pushed through the crowd, found my regional manager, and pulled him aside. I told him everything in a frantic whisper: the medical bay, the test subjects, the drugs we'd been distributing, the doctor who tried to sedate me. His face went pale. Then he grabbed my arm, hard. "Come with me. We need to talk privately." He led me to an empty conference room, closed the door, and that's when I realized my mistake. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd recruited me for specialized distribution. He'd signed off on every delivery. "You stupid, curious bastard," he said quietly. "You weren't supposed to investigate. You were supposed to deliver packages and keep your mouth shut. People are being experimented on, murdered. Clinical trials have acceptable casualty rates. These passengers volunteered by seeking medical treatment. They signed waivers. Waivers for seasickness treatment, not experimental drug trials." He pulled out his phone. "Security will escort you to a private cabin until we dock. You'll be sedated for your own safety. Clearly you're having some kind of breakdown. When we reach port, you'll be admitted to a facility where we can properly address your mental health crisis. A few weeks of treatment, and I'm confident you'll gain a clearer perspective on confidentiality agreements and the consequences of violating them." I ran again. This time I headed for the main passenger areas, places with crowds and witnesses. I went to guest services, demanded to see the captain, told them a physician had attacked me in the medical bay. They looked at me like I was insane, but they called security. Security arrived, and I recognized one of them from the medical bay corridor. They were all part of it. The entire ship's operation was compromised. I'm writing this from a public computer in the ship's library, surrounded by other passengers. I've sent encrypted copies of everything to 3 journalists, 2 regulatory agencies, and a lawyer friend who specializes in whistleblower cases. I've uploaded photos to cloud storage with instructions to release them if I don't check in every 6 hours. We dock in 4 hours. Until then, I'm staying in public spaces, never alone, never letting medical staff or security isolate me. Every medical staff member on this ship wants me sedated. Every security officer wants me contained. And my own employer wants me institutionalized or dead. 12 passengers are still in that medical bay, sedated and dying slowly from experimental drugs I helped deliver. I didn't know what I was part of. But ignorance isn't innocence. I enabled this by not asking questions, by accepting good money in exchange for blind compliance. Meridian Biofarm has been using cruise ships as floating laboratories for unauthorized human trials. They recruit sales representatives like me to distribute compounds through specialized networks without telling us the truth. They exploit passengers who seek legitimate medical care using consent forms buried in medical treatment waivers that no one reads carefully. And they'll continue doing it unless someone stops them. I don't know if I'll make it off this ship alive. I don't know if the evidence I've sent will be enough to shut them down. But I know I can't stay silent just to protect myself anymore. If you're reading this, I either survived long enough to testify, or I became subject number 13 in an experiment I helped enable. Either way, the truth is out now. Check your pharmaceutical sales representative's specialized accounts. Question why ships need medical facilities beyond basic emergency care. Read every consent form before signing. And understand that corporate evil doesn't announce itself. It hides behind good salaries, plausible explanations, and people like me who chose not to see what we were really doing until it was almost too late. The ship's horn just sounded. We're approaching port. 4 more hours until I'm either free or disappeared. I chose to deliver packages without asking questions. Now I'm choosing to expose everything, even if it destroys me. That's not redemption. It's just the bare minimum requirement of being human. My name is Elena, and I explore places people aren't supposed to go. Abandoned hospitals, condemned hotels, forgotten subway tunnels. I've climbed through them all with my camera, documenting decay and secrets for my urban exploration channel. I thought I'd seen everything until I found Deck 7 on the majestic Voyager. Some places don't want to be documented. Some places want to keep you. I booked the cruise specifically because the majestic Voyager is old, commissioned in 1987, refurbished multiple times, but never fully modernized. Old ships have history, forgotten spaces, areas that get sealed off during renovations and then erased from official deck plans. Perfect for exploration. The plan was simple. During port days when most passengers and crew were off the ship, I'd explore restricted areas. I dressed in athletic clothes that could pass as gym wear, carried a small backpack with my camera, flashlight, and basic tools for opening locked doors. Nothing illegal. I never break locks, just test handles and slip through when I find access. Port day in Cozumel, I waited until the ship was nearly empty. Most passengers were on excursions. Crew members were either on shore leave or occupied with maintenance. I started on Deck 8, working my way through crew corridors, mapping the layout, filming everything. That's when I noticed something odd about the stairwell. Most decks were numbered clearly, Deck 5, 6, 8, 9. But there was no Deck 7 marking. The stairs went from 8 directly to 6, with a landing between them that should have been Deck 7's entrance. Except that entrance was sealed with a metal panel painted the same color as the wall, designed to blend in. Easy to miss unless you were specifically looking for architectural inconsistencies. The panel wasn't welded. It was held by industrial screws. I had a multi-tool in my bag. It took 15 minutes to remove enough screws to create a gap I could slip through. Behind the panel was a corridor that didn't match the rest of the ship. Where other decks had been updated with modern lighting and fresh paint, this hallway looked frozen in time. Old fluorescent fixtures, some flickering, some dead. Carpet that was worn but not dirty, like people had walked here regularly years ago but not recently. Brass plaques on doors reading "Officers' Quarters" with names I couldn't read in the dim light. This was exactly the kind of forgotten space I lived for. I started filming, narrating quietly for my camera. I'm standing in what appears to be a decommissioned officer's residential deck on the majestic Voyager. Based on the design elements, this section probably dates to the ship's original construction in the late 80s. You can see the carpet pattern here. Classic cruise ship aesthetic from that era. These quarters would have housed senior officers, captain, chief engineer, staff captain. At some point, probably during a major refit, they moved officer housing to a different deck and sealed this entire section off. I walked down the corridor, testing door handles. Most were locked, But the fourth door on the left, marked Staff Captain, turned when I tried it. The room inside was fully furnished. A bed made with crisp white sheets. A desk with papers arranged in neat stacks. A closet containing uniforms on hangers. A bathroom with toiletries on the counter. It looked like someone had stepped out 5 minutes ago and would return any moment. My excitement overrode my caution. This was incredible content. A perfectly preserved officer's cabin from decades ago, completely untouched. I started filming everything, documenting the space from multiple angles. That's when I noticed the food. On the desk, next to the papers, was a half-eaten sandwich on a plate. The bread wasn't moldy. The lettuce wasn't wilted. This sandwich was fresh, maybe a few hours old at most. My stomach dropped. Someone had been here recently. Was still here, possibly. I checked the bathroom. Wet towel on the rack, condensation on the mirror. Someone had showered this morning. Now I was trespassing in an occupied space, not exploring an abandoned one. I needed to leave before whoever lived here returned. I went back to the door I'd entered through. It was closed. I tried the handle. Locked from the outside. The kind of lock that required a key to open from either side. Panic started rising. I pulled out my phone. No signal this deep in the ship's interior. I went back to the cabin, tried the porthole window. Bolted shut. And even if I could open it, we were at sea now. I'd been so focused on exploring that I hadn't noticed the ship departing port. I was locked in a sealed section of the ship with no way to call for help and evidence that someone was actively living in this supposedly abandoned space. Think logically, I told myself. Crew members must know about this section if someone's living here. They'd do rounds, find me, let me out. I'd face trespassing consequences, maybe get kicked off the ship at the next port, but I'd be fine. I sat on the cabin floor and waited. Camera off to conserve battery. An hour passed, then 2. The ship's movement told me we were well away from port. No one came. I started examining the cabin more carefully, looking for anything that might help me understand where I was or find another exit. The papers on the desk were ship's logs, handwritten in cramped script. I started reading. Day 47. The crew still doesn't understand. I've tried to explain the navigation error, but they look at me like I'm speaking another language. Maybe I am. Maybe we've been sailing in circles so long that forward and backward have lost meaning. Day 63. Found another door today. It leads nowhere, just opens onto a wall. I painted over it. The passengers can't know how many doors lead nowhere. Day 81. My uniform doesn't fit anymore. Not physically, it fits fine. But it doesn't fit who I am. I'm not the staff captain. I don't know what I am now. The ship knows. The ship has always known. The entries became increasingly incoherent, documenting a mental breakdown. The dates didn't make sense. Day 47 through day 120, but no months or years indicated. The handwriting deteriorated from neat script to frantic scrawling. The final entry read, Day 120. They're going to decommission Deck 7. Move us to the new section, but I'm not leaving. This is where I belong. This is where I'll stay. Even after. Even after what? I flipped to the front of the logbook, looking for a name. Staff Captain R. Morrison, Majestic Voyager, 1989. 36 years ago. This couldn't be the same logbook. Paper would have deteriorated, ink would have faded. But the pages were crisp, the writing still dark. I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy, measured, the unmistakable sound of someone in dress shoes walking with military precision. They stopped outside the cabin door. I held my breath. camera clutched in my hands. The door handle turned slowly. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway wearing a staff captain's uniform, white with gold stripes and insignia. His face was pale, almost translucent in the flickering hallway light. He stared at me with eyes that didn't blink. "You're in my quarters," he said. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone. I'll leave right now. I just need you to unlock the door to the stairwell." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "No one leaves deck 7. That's the arrangement. The ship needs us here, so we stay. You understand, don't you? You came looking for abandoned spaces. You found one. Now you're part of it." "I'm not part of anything. I'm a passenger who made a mistake. Please just let me go back to the passenger decks." He tilted his head, studying me. "You're not on the passenger manifest. I checked this morning. The ship doesn't know you're here. That means you can stay without complications. The ship provides for those who stay. Food, water, everything you need. You'll understand eventually. They all do." "They? Who else is here?" He smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen. Not malicious, just empty. "The others who found deck 7. The crew who died but couldn't leave. The passengers who wandered too far. We maintain this deck. We keep the ship's traditions. We don't exist on paper anymore, so we exist here instead." I realized then that I wasn't talking to a person. I was talking to something wearing the memory of Staff Captain Morrison, performing the routine of an officer who died decades ago, but somehow remained trapped in or bound to this sealed section of the ship. "The current crew knows you're here," I said, grasping at any logic I could find. "Someone brought that sandwich. Someone's maintaining this section. The ship maintains us. And yes, some crew know. They leave offerings, keep the traditions. As long as we stay on deck 7, we don't interfere with the ship's operations. It's an understanding that goes back decades. Every ship has spaces like this. Places where the dead continue their duties because the living never properly relieved them. You need to understand something about urban exploration. You develop instincts for danger. Your mind learns to separate creepy atmosphere from genuine threat. Standing in that cabin with something wearing a dead officer's face, every instinct I had screamed threat. I still had my multi-tool. While he talked, I'd been slowly moving my hand toward my backpack. I grabbed the flashlight, heavy, metal, the kind made for emergencies, and swung it at his head with everything I had. It connected with his temple, and he staggered. I didn't wait to see if it hurt him or just surprised him. I ran, out into the corridor, sprinting toward where I remembered the sealed entrance. Behind me, I heard his footsteps. Still measured, still precise, not rushing but following with absolute certainty. Other doors along the corridor began opening. More figures in uniform stepped out, pale faces turning toward me as I ran past. Not aggressive, just watching, like they were waiting to see if I'd become one of them. I reached the panel I'd removed to enter. The screws were back in place, the panel sealed as if I'd never opened it. Impossible. I'd left the screws on the floor, left the panel leaning against the wall. The ship wants to keep me here, I realized. Or something does. I heard Morrison's voice behind me, calm and patient. "You can't leave through the entrance. That's for arrivals, not departures. If you want to leave deck 7, you have to find the other way." "What other way?" "The door that leads nowhere. The one I painted over. You have to be willing to walk through a wall to leave this place. Most people can't do that. They stay instead." I looked at the corridor walls, really looked, and I saw it. A faint outline of a door frame that had been painted over, camouflaged to blend with the wall, located between two cabin doors. A door that shouldn't exist, according to the corridor's layout. The footsteps were closer now. Multiple sets. The crew of Deck 7, converging. I did something that went against every rational instinct. I ran straight at that painted-over door outline and slammed my shoulder into it with full force. The wall gave way, not breaking, but yielding, like pushing through heavy curtains. I tumbled through into a maintenance corridor I recognized, one that was definitely not on Deck 7. Behind me, the wall solidified again, becoming seamless metal without any trace of a door. I ran until I reached a stairwell with clear deck numbers. Deck 8. I was back in normal ship space. I ran to my cabin, locked the door, and stood in the shower fully clothed, trying to stop shaking. I checked my camera footage. Nothing. The entire memory card was corrupted, files unreadable. My phone's photo gallery showed blank thumbnails for every picture I'd taken on Deck 7. Even the video of me entering the sealed corridor was gone, replaced with static. The only proof I had was the multi-tool in my bag, still covered in dust from removing those screws, and a physical sensation of impact when I'd hit Morrison with the flashlight. I never reported what happened. Who would believe it? I stayed in my cabin for the rest of the cruise, left the ship the moment we docked. But I've researched since. Staff Captain R. Morrison died in 1989 during the Majestic Voyager's transatlantic crossing. Heart attack in his quarters. The ship's logs from that voyage note his death, his funeral at sea, everything properly documented. Except Deck 7 was decommissioned in 1992, 3 years after his death. Which means, for 3 years, his body was removed, his quarters were cleaned, but his presence remained. And when they sealed that deck, they sealed him in with it. Other passengers have reported strange experiences on the Majestic Voyager, people who wander and find doors that shouldn't exist, corridors that don't match the ship's official layout. Most dismiss it as getting lost on a large vessel. I know better. The Majestic Voyager has Deck 7 between 8 and 6, hidden behind panels, maintained by something that isn't quite crew and isn't quite ghost. And it's always looking for new residents to join the staff who never left. I don't explore ships anymore. Some spaces are abandoned for good reasons, and some spaces aren't abandoned at all. They're occupied by people who forgot how to stop being crew even after death relieved them of duty. The last thing Morrison said to me as I ran toward that impossible door echoes every time I see a cruise ship advertisement. Tell them we're still here. Tell them Deck 7 still serves the ship. Tell them we're waiting for the next person who wants to see what they're not supposed to see. So consider this your warning from someone who barely escaped. Sealed sections exist for reasons beyond safety codes. Locked doors protect more than liability. And old ships harbor crews who forgot how to stop serving even after death signed their discharge papers. Deck 7 is still waiting, still maintained, still recruiting. Don't go looking for it. My name is John, and 3 months ago, I almost lost my family to something that happened in cabin 8042 before we ever boarded the ship. What I'm about to tell you isn't a ghost story. It's a warning about trauma that soaks into walls, waits for the right conditions to replay itself. We were those conditions. My wife Rachel and I saved for 2 years to afford this cruise. Our daughters, Emma, age 7, and Sophie, age 5, had never been on a real vacation. We'd promised them something special, and the 7-night Western Caribbean voyage seemed perfect. Family-friendly, affordable if we booked early, and the connecting cabins meant the girls could have their own space, while staying close to us. Cabins 8042 and 8044, connecting door between them. The photos online showed clean, cheerful rooms with ocean views. What they didn't show was the history. We boarded in Miami on a Saturday afternoon, all of us excited. The girls were bouncing around, exploring every drawer and closet. Rachel was already planning which restaurants to try. I was just relieved we'd made it. Getting a family of 4 ready for a cruise is logistical warfare. The connecting door between our cabins was supposed to lock from both sides for privacy. But when I tested it that first day, the lock mechanism was broken. The door would close but wouldn't latch, drifting open an inch or two if you didn't physically hold it shut. I called maintenance. They said they'd fix it the next day. That night, Emma woke up screaming. Rachel and I ran into the girls' cabin to find Emma sitting up in bed, pointing at the corner near the bathroom. The sad woman was watching Sophie sleep, she said, tears streaming down her face. Classic kid nightmare. We comforted her, checked under the bed and in the closet to prove no one was there, left a nightlight on. Kids have vivid imaginations, especially in new environments. We thought nothing of it. The second night, both girls came into our cabin at 3 a.m. They'd heard crying coming from our room, they said. A woman crying like her heart was broken. But we'd been asleep. Neither of us had made a sound. I was starting to get annoyed. Between the broken door lock and the girls having nightmares, this vacation wasn't off to the relaxing start we'd hoped for. I called maintenance again about the lock. They came, looked at it, said they'd need to order a part. Meanwhile, the door kept drifting open. Day 3, while the girls were at the kids' club and Rachel was at a spa appointment, I decided to thoroughly inspect both cabins. I'm not sure what I was looking for. Evidence of mold or something environmental that might be affecting the girls' sleep. What I found was worse. The carpet in the girls' cabin had a large stain near the bed closest to the bathroom. It had been cleaned, but you could still see the outline if you looked carefully. I went to the bathroom and grabbed the UV sanitizing wand the cruise line provided for germaphobes who wanted to check their cabins. Under UV light, that stain glowed. Not just glowed. It lit up like someone had poured a bucket of luminol on it. Blood. A massive amount of blood. Cleaned but not removed. Still embedded in the carpet padding. My protective instinct kicked into overdrive. I checked the rest of the cabin under UV light. More stains on the wall near the bed. Spatter pattern. Something violent had happened in this room. I went to guest services immediately, demanded to know the history of the cabin. The representative was evasive, said all cabins are thoroughly cleaned between guests, suggested I was overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I was a father who just found evidence of serious violence in the room where my daughters were sleeping. I pushed harder, threatened to make a scene, and finally she pulled me aside. There was an incident 3 cruises ago, she said quietly. A domestic situation. The cabins have been cleaned according to protocol. There's no safety issue. What kind of domestic situation? I can't discuss details, but the passengers involved are no longer. It was resolved. The cabins are safe. Resolved. What a word to use for whatever had left that much blood behind. I demanded new cabins. She said the ship was fully booked. I could file a complaint and receive a future cruise credit. But there were no available cabins to move us to mid-voyage. I went back to tell Rachel. She was already in our cabin, sitting on the bed with a strange expression. "Did you rearrange my things?" she asked. "No. Why?" "My clothes in the closet are organized differently than I left them. And there's a perfume smell in here, not mine. Something floral and old-fashioned." The hair on my neck stood up. I told her about the bloodstains, about the incident. Her face went pale. "We need to get the girls off this ship," she said. But we couldn't. We were 2 days from the next port, and even then, disembarking meant losing everything we'd paid, plus travel costs to get home. We had maybe $300 in our budget for the entire cruise, not enough for emergency flights for 4 people. We decided to keep the girls close, stay together as much as possible, and count down the days until we could leave. That's when things accelerated. That night, Rachel and I were in our cabin, the girls asleep next door with the connecting door open so we could see them. Around midnight, I heard voices. Not from the hallway. From the girls' cabin. A man and woman arguing. I sat up, ready to confront whoever had entered our daughter's room. But Rachel grabbed my arm. "That's not in their cabin," she whispered. "That's coming from inside these walls." The argument got louder. The woman was crying, begging someone to calm down, saying she was sorry. The man's voice was aggressive, accusing her of ruining everything. Then sounds of a struggle, furniture moving, the woman screaming, then silence. I checked on the girls, both still asleep, undisturbed. But I'd heard what I'd heard. Rachel had heard it too. We weren't imagining this. The next morning, Emma asked me why Mommy had been standing in their room in the middle of the night. "She was just standing there, staring at Sophie's bed," Emma said. But when I called her name, she didn't answer. Then she left through the other door. Rachel hadn't been in their room. She'd been asleep next to me all night. I'd been awake, alert. She never got up. "What did she look like?" I asked carefully. "Like Mommy." But her face was sad. And she was wearing a white nightgown, not her pajamas. My blood went cold. Emma had described exactly what she'd seen the first night, the sad woman. But now she was seeing Rachel's face on her. I pulled Rachel into the bathroom where the girls couldn't hear. Something is wrong with these cabins. Really wrong. We need to document everything and demand they move us, even if it means camping in the hallway. Rachel nodded, but her eyes looked distant, unfocused. "Do you ever feel like you've already lived through something before it happens?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I keep having this feeling like I know what you're going to say before you say it. Like I've had this conversation before. Like I've been in this cabin before, lived these exact days before." She touched the wall like she was remembering something. "There's something familiar about this room, about being trapped here with you and the girls, with nowhere to go." Her tone scared me more than anything else had. This wasn't Rachel talking. This was something else using her voice. That afternoon, while Rachel took the girls to a movie, I went back to guest services. This time I recorded the conversation on my phone. I demanded the full incident report, threatened legal action, made enough noise that a supervisor got involved. He took me to a private office and told me the truth. 3 cruises ago, a family had stayed in cabins 8042 and 8044. Mother, father, 2 daughters, almost the exact same family configuration as ours. They'd been having marital problems. On the 4th night of the cruise, the father had snapped. He'd attacked his wife in cabin 8042, stabbed her multiple times while the children slept next door. Then he'd killed himself. The daughters woke up and found their mother's body. The cruise line had cleaned the cabins, replaced the carpet padding, repainted the walls. They'd brought in a cleaning crew that specialized in trauma scenes. But they hadn't blessed the space, hadn't acknowledged that something more than physical residue might remain. "Why didn't you tell us this when we checked in?" I demanded. "We're not required to disclose deaths that occur in cabins. It would be financially devastating if we had to mark every room where someone died." This wasn't someone dying. This was murder. The cabins are clean. They meet all safety standards. What happened was tragic, but it doesn't pose a risk to current guests. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to grab him and force him to spend one night in that cabin with his own family. Instead, I left and went to find Rachel and the girls. I found them in the cabin. Rachel was packing, throwing clothes into suitcases with mechanical precision. The girls were sitting on the bed in their room, singing. But the song wasn't anything I recognized. It was some twisted lullaby in a language I didn't understand. "Rachel, what are you doing?" She looked at me, and her expression was wrong. Flat, empty. "We can't leave," she said. "We never leave. We stay in the cabin, and it happens again and again. That's how it works." "That's not you talking. Fight this. We're getting off this ship." She picked up a knife from the room service tray. We'd ordered breakfast that morning. She held it loosely, looking at it like she was trying to remember something. She picked up the knife, Rachel said in that flat voice. She tried to defend herself, but he was stronger. He said she'd ruined their family. He said it was her fault they couldn't be happy. I realized with horror that Rachel wasn't just possessed, she was remembering. She was reliving the murder from the victim's perspective. The girls started screaming in the next room. Not scared screaming, angry screaming. The same scream the father must have made. I ran to them. Both of them were standing on the bed, faces contorted with rage that no 5- and 7-year-old should be capable of expressing. "You ruined everything," Sophie screamed in a voice too deep to be hers. "We can't be happy because of you." They lunged at each other, and I barely caught them before they collided. They fought against me with strength that shouldn't have been possible, trying to get to each other, trying to hurt each other. Everything clicked into place. The anniversary. Today was 4 days into the cruise, the same day the original murder had happened. The family configuration, mother, father, 2 daughters, same as the victims. The trauma soaked into these walls was replaying itself, and my family was the cast. I carried both screaming girls into the hallway, yelling for help. Rachel followed with the knife, and I saw her face shift, confusion breaking through whatever had taken her over. "John, why am I holding this?" "Drop it. Drop it now." She did, and the knife clattered to the floor. Other passengers had come into the hallway. Security arrived. I explained as calmly as I could that my family was having a medical emergency, and we needed to be moved immediately. That something environmental in the cabin was affecting us. They separated us. Put me in one cabin with the girls, Rachel in the medical bay for evaluation. Breaking the family unit, breaking the pattern. By morning, whatever had gripped us had loosened. Rachel remembered feeling compelled to hurt me, remembered memories that weren't hers flooding her mind. The girls remembered rage they'd never felt before. The cruise line moved us to different cabins on a different deck. They offered refunds, free future cruises, anything to keep us quiet. We refused everything except a promise to have those cabins properly dealt with, blessed, exorcised, or permanently sealed. I don't know if they followed through. We got off that ship the moment we reached port and flew home immediately. But sometimes I still see that flat expression on Rachel's face when she's tired. Sometimes the girls sing that twisted lullaby in their sleep. The violence didn't complete its cycle, but it touched us, changed us, left residue we can't scrub away. Cabin 8042 might be clean now, might be blessed, might be sealed, or it might be waiting for another family, father, mother, 2 daughters, to check in on the right date and provide the energy for the trauma to complete its cycle. Stay away from connecting cabins with broken locks. Question why your room has been recently renovated. And understand that some violence is so profound, it doesn't end when the victims die. It loops, waiting for the right people to walk into the wrong rooms on the wrong day and become the cast for a horror that never stops performing. We survived because I broke the pattern before it completed. The next family might not be that lucky. My name is Serafina, and 18 months ago, a drunk driver put me in a wheelchair for life. 6 months ago, I finally stopped feeling sorry for myself and booked a solo cruise to prove I could still live independently. What I discovered in accessible cabin D217 wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was a systematic exploitation of disabled passengers that the cruise industry has been hiding for years. They thought my disability made me vulnerable. They were wrong. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Spinal cord injury at T10, complete paraplegia. Doctors saying I'd never walk again with the kind of finality that makes you want to prove them wrong even though you can't. I went through the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. I got stuck on anger for a while. Angry at the driver who walked away with a suspended license while I'd never walk anywhere again. Angry at a world built for people who could climb stairs and use standard bathrooms and never think twice about doorway widths. But anger only gets you so far. Eventually, I had to choose between being bitter or being alive. I chose alive. The cruise was my declaration of independence. First major trip alone since the accident. I researched accessible cruise lines, read reviews from other wheelchair users, found one that promised fully accessible experiences. The Horizon Pearl advertised their commitment to disabled passengers, modified cabins, accessible excursions, staff trained in disability assistance. It seemed perfect. Cabin D217 was on deck 5, mid-ship where movement is most stable. The promotional photos showed exactly what I needed: widened doorways, roll-in shower, grab bars, lowered counters, even a specialized charging station for mobility devices. When I wheeled into that cabin on embarkation day, I actually cried. Not from sadness, from relief. This was a space designed for my body, not despite my disability, but accommodating it. I felt seen. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. I navigated the ship independently, attended shows, ate at restaurants, socialized with other passengers. People didn't stare at my wheelchair the way they did on land. On a cruise ship, everyone's just trying to enjoy themselves. I felt normal for the first time since the accident. Day 3, I noticed something small. I'd left my phone on the nightstand positioned at a specific angle, a habit I developed because I'm meticulous about where I place things when I can't just stand up and look for them. When I returned from dinner, the phone was moved. Only slightly, maybe an inch, but definitely moved. I dismissed it. Housekeeping probably bumped it while cleaning. Except I'd hung the "Do Not Disturb" sign because I prefer to manage my own space on my own schedule. No one should have entered. Day 4, more items moved. My medication organizer turned to face a different direction. My laptop closed when I'd left it open. My clothes in the accessible closet rearranged from how I'd organized them. I started paying attention. That night, before leaving for the evening show, I took photos of exactly how I'd arranged everything. When I returned 3 hours later, things had moved again. Someone was entering my cabin while I was gone. Someone was going through my belongings. I called guest services, explained the situation. They sent security to check the door lock, functioning perfectly, no signs of forced entry. They suggested perhaps I was mistaken about how I'd arranged things, that adjusting to a new space could be disorienting. That condescending tone, I'd heard it 1,000 times since the accident. The assumption that my disability meant my perception couldn't be trusted. I almost accepted their explanation. Almost. Instead, I started investigating. The wheelchair charging station was built into the wall near the bed, a specialized outlet with higher amperage for charging mobility device batteries overnight. I'd noticed it had a slightly hollow sound when my wheelchair bumped against it. That night, I examined it more carefully. Behind the decorative panel covering the charging station was a small hole, maybe 1/4 inch in diameter, positioned at the exact height of my bed. I got a flashlight and looked through from the other side by removing the panel completely. The hole provided a clear view of the entire sleeping area, and it had been recently used. I could see wear marks around the edges, slight discoloration from body heat or breath condensation. Someone had been watching me sleep. My hands were shaking. I checked the bathroom next. The accessible shower had a built-in bench and handheld shower head. The wall behind the bench sounded hollow when I knocked. I found a seam, almost invisible, where a panel could be removed from the other side. Behind that wall, there would be space enough for someone to stand, to watch, to listen. Every accessibility modification in this cabin, the widened doorways, the lowered fixtures, the specialized equipment, all of it had been designed not just for my use, but for surveillance. I wanted to scream, to call security, demand answers, make them acknowledge what they'd done. But something stopped me. If this was systematic, if the cruise line knew, reporting it would only alert them that I'd discovered their system. And if the previous occupant of this cabin had filed a complaint and disappeared overboard, which I was starting to suspect, then making noise could be dangerous. I needed evidence. Lots of it. Undeniable proof. I went to the ship's library and used their public computer, avoiding my personal devices in case they were compromised. I searched for accessible cabin complaints, disability rights violations on cruises, anything that might connect to what I was experiencing. I found a forum. Buried on a disability advocacy website, there was a thread titled Accessible Cruise Cabin Concerns, Horizon Pearl. Dozens of passengers over the past 2 years reporting identical experiences. Items moved. Sensation of being watched. Unexplained sounds from walls. And every single person reporting these experiences was disabled. Wheelchair users, blind passengers, deaf travelers, anyone requiring accessible accommodations. One user wrote, "I filed a formal complaint with the cruise line. They offered me a refund and free future cruise if I signed an NDA. I refused. 3 days later, I'm being told my complaint has been resolved and the matter is closed. But nothing changed. And the crew member I reported for entering my cabin without permission is still working." Another. I found camera equipment hidden in the bathroom accessibility bars. I took photos and contacted a lawyer when I got home. The cruise line settled out of court with a massive NDA. I can't legally discuss what I found, but I'm warning other disabled passengers. Don't book accessible cabins on this ship. And then one that made my blood run cold. My sister was on the Horizon Pearl last month. Accessible cabin D2117. She emailed me about feeling watched, about things being moved. She said she was going to report it to the captain. That was her last email. 2 days later, the cruise line contacted my family saying she'd gone overboard. Presumed accident. But my sister was careful, always careful. She wouldn't have gone near the railing alone. I think someone made sure she couldn't report what she found. D217. My cabin. The previous occupant hadn't just filed a complaint. She'd died. Or been killed. I sat in that library, reading testimonies from disabled passengers who'd been systematically violated, and I understood something crucial. They targeted us because we're perceived as easy victims, less credible if we report, less likely to be believed, more likely to be dismissed as confused or unreliable. Our vulnerability weaponized against us. The rage I felt was different from the anger after my accident. This was focused, productive rage. These people had looked at disabled passengers and seen opportunities for exploitation. They'd hidden surveillance in the very modifications meant to give us independence. And they thought we wouldn't fight back. I documented everything. I took detailed photos and videos of the peepholes, the hollow walls, the surveillance points. I recorded measurements and positions. I wrote detailed descriptions of every instance of items being moved. I downloaded the entire forum thread onto a flash drive. And I did it all while appearing completely unaware. When I returned to my cabin each evening, I acted normal. I didn't cover the peepholes or move furniture to block sight lines. I wanted them to think I suspected nothing, that I was just another disabled passenger too focused on navigating accessibility challenges to notice the violations happening around me. But every night, I uploaded encrypted files to cloud storage with instructions to release everything to disability rights organizations, media, outlets, and law enforcement if I didn't check in every 12 hours. I also started recognizing patterns. Certain crew members appeared in corridors near accessible cabins more frequently than others. A maintenance worker who always seemed to be servicing something near D217 when I left for meals. A steward who asked invasive questions about my mobility limitations and daily schedule. They were coordinating. This wasn't one person's sick obsession. This was an organized operation targeting disabled passengers across multiple cabins, possibly multiple ships in the fleet. On day 6, I received a note slipped under my door. We know you've been asking questions. Curiosity can be dangerous on a ship. Accidents happen, especially to passengers with mobility limitations. Enjoy the rest of your cruise. A threat. Which meant they knew I'd found something, which meant I was running out of time. I had 2 days until we docked. 2 days to survive while pretending I was scared into silence. 2 days to gather any remaining evidence without them knowing I had already secured everything in ways they couldn't erase. I spent those days in public spaces. Never alone, never in situations where I could be isolated. I ate every meal in crowded restaurants. I attended every show and event. I made sure other passengers saw me, talked to me, would remember if I suddenly disappeared. And I kept documenting. I befriended other passengers in accessible cabins, casually asked if they'd experienced anything unusual. 3 out of 5 reported the same violations. Items moved, sensation of being watched, unexplained sounds. When we finally docked, I transferred to a wheelchair-accessible van I'd prearranged and went straight to a disability rights attorney I'd contacted from the ship. I gave them everything: the photos, the forum evidence, the testimonies, the threat note. Within a week, we'd filed a federal lawsuit. Within 2 weeks, major disability advocacy organizations had joined. Within a month, investigative journalists were publishing exposés about systematic surveillance of disabled passengers across the cruise industry. The Horizon Pearl suspended operations. Multiple crew members were arrested. The cruise line's parent company faced congressional hearings about disability rights violations and passenger safety. But here's what still keeps me awake. How many years had this been happening? How many disabled passengers had been watched, violated, exploited? How many had reported it and been silenced with NDAs or threatened into submission? How many had accidentally gone overboard before they could expose what they'd found? The woman who died in D217 before me. Her name was Patricia. She was a 52-year-old wheelchair user traveling solo for the first time after her divorce. She'd emailed her sister about feeling watched. She'd planned to report it to the captain. And 2 days later, she was dead. Her death ruled an unfortunate accident. I think about Patricia often, about how close I came to being another accident, about how my able-bodied privilege before my injury meant I understood how to be believed, how to gather evidence, how to protect myself in ways many disabled people never get taught because society sees us as perpetual victims rather than potential advocates. Cabin D217 probably has new occupants now if the ship ever sails again. The surveillance equipment was removed as part of the settlement. But I wonder how many other ships, how many other cruise lines, have similar systems targeting passengers they perceive as vulnerable. Disabled people aren't vulnerable because of our disabilities. We're vulnerable because society builds systems that exploit us and then dismisses us when we try to report it. We're vulnerable because when we say something is wrong, we're told we're confused, oversensitive, misunderstanding. I refuse to be dismissed anymore. I refuse to disappear like Patricia. I refuse to accept that my wheelchair made me an acceptable target. The lawsuit is ongoing. The criminal trials are scheduled. And I've started a nonprofit documenting accessibility violations across the travel industry, creating resources so disabled travelers know what surveillance looks like, know their rights, know how to protect themselves. Patricia didn't get justice while she was alive. But I'm fighting to make sure she gets it now. And I'm fighting to make sure no other disabled passenger walks or wheels into a cabin designed to exploit them while pretending to accommodate them. The accessible cabin was supposed to give me independence. Instead, it tried to take everything from me. But I'm still here, still fighting, still refusing to be the easy victim they expected. Independence isn't just about accessible doorways and roll-in showers. It's about refusing to let anyone turn your vulnerability into their opportunity. It's about fighting back even when they think your disability makes you too weak to resist. They were wrong about me, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure they can never be right about anyone else. My name is Miguel, and I've died on this ship 47 times. I know because I've been counting. Each time the loop resets, I wake up in cabin E109 on embarkation day, and I have exactly 7 days before the explosion kills me again. This is attempt number 48. I'm writing this down because if I fail again, maybe the next version of me will find it and do better. The nightmares started 3 months before I ever set foot on the Eternal Odyssey. Same dream every night. I'm dealing blackjack in the ship's casino. The cards feel wrong in my hands, and I look down to see they're all blank. Then the ship shudders, lights flicker, and fire consumes everything. I wake up screaming, always at 3:47 a.m., always drenched in sweat. I told myself it was job anxiety. I'd just been hired as a casino dealer for a cruise line, my first contract on a ship. 6-month rotation, good pay, a chance to save money while seeing the world. The Eternal Odyssey was supposed to be my fresh start after years of dead-end casino jobs on land. When I boarded in Fort Lauderdale and saw my crew cabin assignment, E109, lowest deck, economy inside cabin with no window, something in my chest went cold. That number, I'd seen it before. In the dreams, my cabin door always showed E109 before the explosion. Coincidence, I told myself. Just a number. Cabins have to be numbered something. But walking into that cabin felt like walking into a memory. The layout was exactly as I'd dreamed it. Narrow bed on the left, tiny closet, microscopic bathroom, a desk bolted to the wall. Even the stain on the ceiling above the bed matched the one from my nightmares. I unpacked in a daze, trying to shake the feeling that I'd done this exact sequence of actions before. Hung uniform in closet, put toiletries in bathroom, placed wallet and phone on desk. Every movement felt rehearsed, like my body knew the choreography before my mind caught up. That first night, I reported to the casino for orientation. The floor manager explained my rotation, introduced me to other dealers, showed me the tables. And then a passenger approached my blackjack table. Middle-aged man, Hawaiian shirt, wedding ring. And before he opened his mouth, I knew exactly what he was going to say. "Is this seat lucky?" he asked, pointing to third base. "They're all lucky if you play smart," I heard myself respond, words coming automatically. He laughed. "I like you already. Name's Tom. First cruise." Tom. I knew his name was Tom. I knew he'd bet aggressively, lose $300 in the first hour, then switch to conservative play and end the night up 50. I knew his wife would come looking for him at 11:30, annoyed but not surprised. I knew all of this before it happened. And it happened exactly as I knew it would. Déjà vu, I told myself. Common psychological phenomenon. Brains misfire sometimes, create false sense of familiarity. Completely normal. But the second night, I predicted 5 more passenger AISOS conversations word for word. I knew which slot machines would pay out and when. I knew a server would drop a tray of drinks at exactly 9:17 p.m. I knew the drunk couple at roulette would get into an argument about betting strategy at 10:45. Every single prediction came true. On day 3, I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't déjà vu. This was foreknowledge. Somehow, impossibly, I'd experienced this cruise before. During my break, I went to the crew library, a small room with outdated books and a single computer for crew use. I searched the ship's internal database, looking for, I don't know what. Evidence that I was losing my mind, maybe. What I found was worse. In the crew records, under deceased personnel, was my name. Miguel Santos, casino dealer, date of death listed as 7 days from now. Cause of death, explosion in lower deck crew quarters. Status, body recovered, repatriated. I stared at that screen, hands shaking. That date was this cruise's disembarkation day. According to the ship's records, I was going to die in 4 days. I logged out, tried to convince myself it was a clerical error. Maybe there was another Miguel Santos. Maybe someone had entered data wrong. Maybe I was having a breakdown and hallucinating. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd lived this cruise before, and I'd died at the end of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in cabin E109, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember. If I'd lived this before, where were the memories? Why did everything feel like déjà vu instead of clear recollection? At 3:47 a.m., I woke from the nightmare. Same dream, same time. And as I sat up in bed, sweating and terrified, I noticed something I'd missed before. The desk had a false bottom in one of the drawers. I pulled the drawer completely out, felt along the underside, found a seam. Inside the hidden compartment was a notebook. Water damaged, pages warped, handwriting that looked like mine but shakier, more desperate. The first entry read, "Loop not 23. If you're reading this, you're me. We've died 22 times. Here's what I know." My hands were numb as I read. The notebook documented everything. Patterns in the loop, passenger behaviors, crew schedules, the exact sequence of events leading to the explosion, and most horrifying, evidence that I wasn't the only one trapped. Other crew members remembered too. The entry continued. Look for the ones who seem too familiar with routines, who predict things before they happen. They're stuck like we are. Talk to them. Compare notes. We need to understand what's happening before we can break free. The notebook listed names. 3 other crew members, a housekeeper, an engineer, a waiter, all showing signs of loop awareness, all listed in the death registry for the same date as me. I spent day 4 finding them. Started with the housekeeper, a woman in her 30s who looked exhausted in a way that transcended physical tiredness. "You remember, don't you?" I said when I caught her alone in a service corridor. Her face went pale. "How many loops have you survived?" "This is my first time remembering. But I found a notebook. Previous me has been through this 47 times. She closed her eyes. "I'm on loop 63. I've been trapped longer than you." The engineer was on loop 38. The waiter on loop 51. We met in the crew mess after midnight, comparing experiences, trying to understand the mechanics of our prison. "The ship isn't real," the engineer explained. "Or it is, but it exists outside normal time. We're stuck in a temporal loop, same 7-day cruise repeating infinitely. Most passengers and crew reset completely each loop, no memory retention. But some of us remember, usually the ones who die in the explosion." "Why don't we remember from the beginning?" I asked. "Protection mechanism, maybe," the housekeeper suggested. "Full memory of dying repeatedly would drive us insane immediately. Instead, we get fragments, dreams, déjà vu. The memories surface gradually as the loop progresses." "So we're ghosts?" the waiter asked. "Is that what we are?" "We're trapped," the engineer said. "The ship is trapped. The whole voyage is trapped in a pocket of recurring time. The explosion happens, everyone dies, and instead of ending, time resets to embarkation day. Most people never know. They live the same week over and over, completely unaware. But those of us who died violently enough, traumatically enough, we started remembering." I thought about the notebook, about 47 previous versions of me desperately trying to understand and escape. "Has anyone tried to prevent the explosion?" They all looked at each other. The housekeeper spoke first. "Every loop we try. We've warned the captain. We've tried to sabotage the engine room. We've attempted to evacuate passengers. Nothing works. The explosion always happens. The timeline is fixed." "That can't be true," I said. "If we're aware, if we can remember, there has to be a way to change things." The engineer shook his head. "We've tried everything. The ship won't let us alter major events. Minor things, sure. You can change a conversation, skip a meal, avoid a passenger. But anything that would prevent the explosion, the timeline corrects. Crew members who try to sabotage engines get reassigned at the last minute. Warnings to the captain get dismissed. Even when we physically try to stop it, something always interferes. This couldn't be all there was. An eternity of dying, resetting, remembering just enough to suffer through it consciously. There had to be something we were missing. I went back to the notebook, reading more carefully. Loop 23's version of me had been methodical, documenting every attempt to break free. But toward the end of the notebook, the tone changed. Loop Najibur 47. Final entry. I figured something out. The explosion isn't random. It's the anchor point, the moment that traps us here. Every loop, we die in that explosion. And the trauma creates enough psychic energy to reset time. We're not trying to prevent the explosion. We're causing it. Our deaths are what powers the loop. The only way to break free is to survive it. But the timeline won't let us survive because our survival would end the loop, and the ship needs the loop to exist. We're fuel. We're batteries. Our repeated deaths keep this ship sailing eternally. I'm going to try something different this time. Instead of preventing the explosion, I'm going to... The entry ended mid-sentence. Whatever Loop 47 Miguel had tried, it hadn't worked. He'd died, reset, and became Loop 48. Me. But he'd been onto something. We weren't passengers in this loop. We were the engine. Our death sustained it. I had 3 days until the explosion. 3 days to do what 47 previous versions of me had failed to do. Survive. I gathered the others, shared what I'd learned. We need to not be on the ship when the explosion happens, I said. If we can get off before the anchor point, maybe we break free. The ship doesn't dock until after the explosion, the housekeeper said. We're at sea when it happens. Then we go overboard. We jump. Anything to not be on the ship at the exact moment of the explosion. They looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But crazy was better than accepting an eternity of death and reset. Day 7, disembarkation day. The explosion was scheduled, if you could call a recursive temporal event scheduled, for 11:23 p.m. Ship's time, lower deck crew quarters, exactly where cabin E109 was located. At 11 p.m., I was on the main deck with the others. We'd gathered emergency life vests, positioned ourselves near lifeboats, ready to jump if necessary. At 11:15 p.m., I felt it. A pulling sensation, like invisible hands dragging me back toward the crew quarters. The ship wanted me in position for the explosion. The timeline was asserting itself. I fought it, gripped the railing. The others felt it too, struggling against the compulsion to return to our death positions. At 11:20 p.m., the pulling became unbearable. One by one, the others gave in, walking like sleepwalkers back toward the lower decks. I held on, every muscle screaming, knowing that if I let go, I'd die again, reset again, lose these memories, and start over. At 11:22 p.m., I couldn't hold on anymore. My hands released the railing. I turned toward the crew quarters, walking against my will. At 11:23 p.m., I was in cabin E109, right where I'd always been, right where I'd die. The explosion came, and I woke up in cabin E109 on embarkation day, loop 49. But this time, something was different. I remembered everything immediately, every loop, every death, every failed attempt. The protective amnesia was gone, and on the desk in my cabin was my notebook, now with a new entry in my handwriting. Loop number 48. We can't escape by surviving. We escape by understanding why we're here. The ship is trapped because something traumatic happened to it. Find the original event. Find what trapped the Eternal Odyssey in the first place. That's the real anchor. The explosion is just the symptom. Miguel, 48. I picked up the pen and added my own entry. Loop 49. Miguel 48 was right. Time to stop trying to escape our deaths and start investigating the ship's death. Whatever trapped the Eternal Odyssey in this loop happened before any of us boarded. We need to find when this ship stopped being a normal vessel and became a ghost ship sailing through recursive time. We need to find the beginning. Miguel 49. Outside my cabin, I heard the familiar sounds of embarkation day starting. Passengers boarding, crew preparing. The same sequence I'd lived 48 times before. But this time, I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to understand. Because somewhere in this ship's history, in its original timeline before the loop began, something went terribly wrong. And until we found that original wound, we'd keep dying, keep resetting, keep sailing this same cursed voyage forever. The Eternal Odyssey wasn't just a name. It was a warning. And I was finally starting to understand what we were really trapped in. My name is Haley, and I make a living talking about murder. What I didn't know when I won that contest was that someone had been listening to every episode, studying my voice, my theories, my fascination with serial killers. They'd chosen me specifically, not as a winner, as the next victim. I run a true crime podcast called Vanished at Sea with about 400,000 subscribers. My niche is unsolved disappearances on cruise ships, passengers who board but never disembark, cases written off as suicides or accidents that don't quite add up. I'd been investigating the Celestial Dream cruise line for 6 months, documenting a pattern of disappearances dating back 15 years. 23 people gone without explanation, all from the same ship, all from luxury suites. Then I received an email from Celestial Dream's marketing department. I'd won their content creator sweepstakes, a complimentary 7-night voyage in the Penthouse Sky Suite, their most exclusive accommodation. All I had to do was create content featuring the cruise experience. I should have been suspicious immediately. I'd never entered any contest. I'd been publicly investigating their company for months, publishing episodes accusing them of covering up suspicious deaths. Why would they give me free access to their flagship vessel? But the opportunity was too perfect. The Penthouse Sky Suite was where 3 of the 23 disappearances had occurred. Getting inside that space, documenting it, interviewing crew members who'd worked those voyages, it could make my career. It could finally force authorities to take these cases seriously. Pride and ambition override survival instincts. I accepted. The suite was on deck 12, accessed by a private elevator requiring a special key card. When the doors opened directly into the accommodation, no hallway, no neighbors, complete isolation. I felt the first whisper of unease. But I pushed it down, started filming. This is Haley from Vanished at Sea, coming to you from the Penthouse Sky Suite on the Celestial Dream. This 2,000-square-foot suite has been the last known location of 3 missing passengers. Over the next week, I'll be investigating what happened to them and why this cruise line has never provided adequate answers to their families. The suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a master bedroom with a king bed, a living room with a full bar, a marble bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, and a wraparound balcony that extended the entire length of the suite. Luxury designed to make you forget you were on a ship. But I wasn't here for luxury. I was here for answers. I started with the basics, documenting the layout, measuring rooms, checking for any modifications or unusual features. The suite had been renovated 4 times since the first disappearance, but the core structure remained the same. That's when I noticed the soundproofing. The walls were unusually thick. When I knocked, they sounded solid, dense. I tested it by playing music at high volume. My neighbor in the next suite over shouldn't have heard anything. I called them pretending to apologize for noise. They had no idea what I was talking about. They hadn't heard a thing. Excessive soundproofing for a luxury suite. Why would you need that on a ship where noise regulations already controlled sound transmission between cabins? Unless you wanted to make sure no one heard screaming. I examined the bathroom next. The jacuzzi tub had jets positioned in a standard pattern, but the drainage system was wrong. There were 2 drains, one for normal water flow, one hidden beneath a removable panel. The second drain was industrial grade, 6 inches wide, designed for high-volume liquid disposal. I'd researched enough crime scenes to know what I was looking at. This wasn't for bath water. This was for disposing of large quantities of liquid, like what remains after dismembering a body in a bathtub. My hands were shaking as I filmed, narrating quietly. The drainage system in this bathroom is designed for something other than bathing. This type of setup is typically found in morgues or medical facilities where biological material needs to be disposed of quickly. The balcony was next. Standard safety regulations require railings at least 42 inches high, with gaps no wider than 4 inches. This balcony met those standards. But when I examined the base of the railing, I found something else. A hidden release mechanism. Disguised as a decorative element, it was actually a lever. When engaged, an entire section of railing could swing outward, creating a 6-foot gap, a gap large enough for a body to fall through. A fall from deck 12 to the ocean below, easily ruled as suicide or accident. Think about what you're seeing, I reminded myself. Document everything. The suite wasn't just luxury accommodation. It was a kill room designed by someone who understood forensics, who'd studied how to make murder look like accident or suicide. I spent that night researching the suite's history. The Celestial Dream had been designed in 2007 by an architectural firm specializing in luxury cruise vessels. The lead architect was a man named Marcus Webb, known for innovative use of space and attention to acoustic engineering. Marcus Webb had died in 2009 in the Penthouse Sky Suite on the maiden voyage of the ship he designed. Official cause of death: suicide by jumping from the balcony. But I found something else in archived news reports. Before becoming a ship architect, Webb had been questioned in connection with 3 missing persons cases in Seattle. Never charged, insufficient evidence, but considered a person of interest. All 3 victims had been young women who'd hired him for home renovation consultations. All 3 had disappeared from their own homes. The pattern was clear. Webb had built his killing space into the ship itself, creating the perfect environment to continue his crimes at sea where maritime jurisdiction complicated investigations. He'd used the penthouse suite for his own purposes until his death. And someone, the cruise line, the current owner, someone, had continued using it exactly as he designed it. The disappearances didn't stop when Webb died. They increased. I pulled up my research files, cross-referencing the victim profiles. All 23 were women between 25 and 40. All were solo travelers, or traveling with friends, not family. All had won contests, received complimentary upgrades, or been given access to the penthouse suite through promotional offers. And all of them had been content creators. Bloggers, vloggers, influencers, podcasters. People who broadcast their locations, their plans, their entire lives online. Easy to research, easy to target, easy to lure with promises of exclusive access, exactly like me. The contest wasn't real. I'd been selected, studied, chosen to be victim number 24. I grabbed my phone to call authorities, but there was no signal. The suite's soundproofing also blocked cellular transmission. I tried the room phone. Deadline. I went to the door to leave. My key card no longer worked. The elevator wouldn't respond. I was locked in. Someone knocked on the door. Not from the hallway, from inside the suite, from the bedroom. I'd been so focused on examining the bathroom and balcony that I hadn't thoroughly checked the bedroom. I ran there now and understood. The closet was too shallow. Should have been 6 feet deep based on the suite's layout, but it was only 3 feet. The back wall was false. As I stared, a panel slid open. A man stepped through, late 50s, expensive suit, friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Haley, I've listened to every episode of your podcast. You're very good at understanding killers. Let's see if you're good at surviving one." My true crime expertise had taught me criminal psychology, victim profiles, investigative techniques. Now I needed it to save my own life. "You're the current owner of the ship," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You inherited Webb's design and continued his work." Inherited is such a limiting word. I perfected it. Marcus was sloppy. He left evidence, drew attention. I've been operating for 15 years without a single serious investigation, until you. My audience knows I'm here. If I disappear, they'll assume you fell from the balcony. Tragic accident. Solo traveler gets too close to the railing while filming content. It's happened 23 times before. Maritime authorities always rule it accidental death. No body recovery in most cases. The ocean is very efficient at disposing of evidence. He was right. I'd studied these exact cases. I knew how easily they'd been dismissed. I knew my disappearance would be just another episode of my own podcast, narrated by someone else, unless I changed the pattern. I'm live streaming. I lied. Right now. Thousands of people watching. If I die, they'll have footage of you. He glanced at my phone on the table. No signal in this suite. You're not streaming anything. True. But he'd hesitated, shown concern about documentation. That was his weakness. He'd gotten away with this because there was never evidence. I needed to create evidence. And I needed to survive long enough for it to matter. Webb designed this suite, I said, stalling for time while I assessed options. Which means he built in contingencies, escape routes. He wouldn't trap himself without a way out. The man's smile faded. I'd hit something. You've studied his work, I continued, but I've studied 15 years of his victims. I know how serial killers think. They always plan for failure, always have exit strategies. I ran for the balcony, not to jump, but to trigger the emergency beacon I'd noticed earlier. A feature required on all modern cruise ships, disguised as decorative lighting. I smashed it, activating a silent alarm that would alert the bridge to a Deck 12 emergency. He grabbed me, and we struggled. My true crime knowledge included self-defense. I'd interviewed enough survivors to learn what worked. I went for his eyes, his throat, the vulnerable points. The suite door burst open, security responding to the beacon. The man released me, tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The private elevator was his only exit, and security controlled it now. They arrested him, found his collection of recordings hidden in the false walls, footage of every murder, evidence he'd kept as trophies. Enough to prove 23 murders and solve cases that had been cold for years. I testified at his trial. The Celestial Dreamline faced massive lawsuits, eventually declared bankruptcy. The ship was decommissioned, the penthouse suite sealed as a crime scene. But I keep thinking about Webb's original design, about how many other ships might have similar features built by architects with dark purposes. About how many contest winners and promotional upgrades are really just victim selection. The penthouse sky suite was designed to be perfect. Perfect soundproofing, perfect disposal systems, perfect isolation. What Webb and his successor didn't account for was a victim who'd spent years studying their methods, understanding their psychology, preparing for the exact scenario they'd created. I survived because I knew how killers think. Because I'd investigated enough murders to recognize a kill room when I stood inside one. Because my obsession with true crime gave me the knowledge to survive, becoming true crime myself. The suite is empty now, evidence collected, ship retired. But somewhere, another architect might be designing another perfect kill room. Another owner might be selecting victims who match a profile. Another contest winner might accept a prize that's actually a death sentence. Stay skeptical of prizes you didn't enter. Question why luxury comes free. Understand that people who study your life online might not be fans. They might be predators choosing their next victim. And if something seems too perfect, too convenient, too good to be true, trust that instinct. It might save your life the way it almost didn't save mine. Thanks for watching another terrifying tale from Mr. Nightveil. These stories are real. though details have been changed to protect survivors. If you made it this far, you're brave enough to hit subscribe. Drop your location and current time in the comments. Let's see where my night dwellers are watching from. Remember, darkness is just the absence of light. But evil? Evil is a choice. Stay safe out there. Until next time.